Start the next session soon. Ladies and gentlemen, our speakers for the next session on India as the World Sees are here and will join us now on the dais. May I request you all to please take your seats and give them a warm welcome? May I request the session chair, Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya, Editor Director, Business Standards, to please open the session.
Uh, shall I go ahead? Yeah. A very good evening to you all. Uh, uh, if I may request those of us who are standing, please be seated. Uh, we have a wonderful panel here to discuss an even more wonderful subject, which is how the world sees India of today. Um, and I have truly an eminent panel here. I will start my extreme left, Professor Syed Munir Khasru. He's the chairman of a very important think tank devoted to Bangladesh, the Institute for Policy, Advocacy and Governance, IPAC, in Bangladesh. He just now told me that he has just opened an office in Delhi. Please welcome Professor Khusru. Uh, Sitting to my left is Ms. Edith N. Nordman. She is the chairperson of Netherlands India Chamber of Commerce and Trade. She just came into Delhi to attend this session and she'll fly back tomorrow. Uh, to my right is a very old good friend, Dr. C. Raja Mohan. I don't need to even introduce him to you. You must be reading his weekly columns in the Indian Express. He's a visiting research professor, Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore, and he's also the contributing editor to the Indian Express. And in extreme right, last but not the least, is Mr. Richard M. Rosso. He's a well-known name in even in the media circles, because anybody who wants a comment on India-US relations, everybody runs to him. He's a senior advisor and chair, US India Policy Studies, Center for Strategic and International Studies. Like Edith, he's also flown into India just to attend this session. And that gives us a sense of the importance of the topic today. What I would do in the next 1 hour is essentially I will set the context, not more than 5 minutes, and then I would request my esteemed panelists to weigh in exactly 5 minutes each on what they think are the basic issues that confront this idea of of how does the world now seeing India. Once they make those comments for 5 minutes each, we will get into a short discussion among ourselves, and then we will throw it open for the remaining 15 minutes or 10 minutes, I'm sure we would have provoked you enough to get some questions from you, and we will like our panelists to answer those questions. In brief, what I would say is that there are 4 or 5 issues that we need to keep in mind of what has happened to India in the last year or so. India's global leadership has has acquired what I would call a new visage, in a sense that the idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, uh, exemplified in the slogan of one earth, one family, one future. Uh, uh, and also implicit in that idea is inclusion. That is something that has come out quite in the open. If you look at India's image to the external world, that's number one. Number two is definitely the G20 meeting here last year provided an opportunity for India to present itself as a potential and eminent leader of the global south. Number three, you already India has established its leadership in launching and spawning many global alliances, whether it is a solar alliance, whether it is a biofuel alliance, and at the same time, uh, India probably is among the few countries which, uh, at particularly at the economic and trade level, promoting idea of multilateralism. Um, I will be failing in my duty if I don't talk about this idea of that all this is happening at a time when India is growing rapidly. Economic growth is among the fastest in the major economies. Uh, the fact of the matter is that this growth and prosperity has come along with some basic revolutionary change in the space of whether it's a digital public infrastructure or even whether it is physical infrastructure. What we are seeing now, India to the outside world is a country that is assuming a leadership role in the global arena and backed by growing economic prosperity. This, in brief, is the backdrop, and I would like now to request Edith to weigh in on how she sees this idea of India emerging to the world. Uh, as I said, I will be fairly ruthless about 5 minutes. So I'll give you a notice at maybe at 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes, and then you will stop at 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm used to that. I argue in court and then I always find a way around, by the way. I borrow time from others. That's what I usually do. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed panelists and honored guests, it's a true honor to be here in Delhi today at the annual business summit of CII. And I'm especially proud to be the only woman here in the panel and the representative from Europe on this distinguished panel. Our topic of today, India as the world sees, is both timely and critical as we navigate an increasingly interconnected and complex global landscape. India is being recognized globally as a hub of opportunity and a robust economic force amid a volatile global landscape. This recognition is a result of deliberate and strategic efforts to reform and innovate. India's initiatives aim not only to elevate its domestic agenda, but also to position the country as a credible and influential global player. It is a journey towards becoming a leading voice and addressing some of the world's most pressing challenges. As having served on the B20 task force for the future of work, skilling, and mobility during India's G20 presidency in 2023, I witnessed firsthand the remarkable leadership and vision that India brought to the table and to the world. The 2023 G20 B20 meetings were hailed as some of the best ever conducted. It's really true. They showcased India's unique approach to inclusiveness and collaboration. Unlike the I in individualism that often dominates Western narratives, the I in India stands for inclusiveness, embodying the belief that being a global leader is a joint effort and shared success. In a world increasingly marked by division and polarization, India's spirit of, you already mentioned it, one world, one family, one future, is not only promising, but essential. These family values grounded in spiritual and moral standards offer a blueprint for global unity and continuity. They remind us that our future success as a species depends on our ability to work together, support one another, and approach challenges with a sense of collective responsibility. However, India's rapid growth, projected at 6.8% and set to overtake Japan as the fourth largest economy by 2025, poses a major challenge. Now it becomes interesting. Overcoming the envy of the rest of the world. Other countries may fear for their own futures, especially given the geopolitical difficulties in and around Europe. This can lead to protectionism, closed borders, and restricted immigration, even when such measures are detrimental to their own development. The challenge is to show that cooperation benefits all and that sharing the workforce, the young and eager from India going to Europe, is not a threat, but a significant opportunity. Europe, for instance, has become, and I may say it, like an old lady, respected for her merits, but with less strength than in her prime years, and perhaps a bit stubborn in believing she knows how things should be done based on past successes. In contrast, India stands as the cheerful, strong new generation on the world stage. India has the drive, the youthful energy, and the population to strive for higher levels of achievement and influence. This demographic advantage, coupled with a strong work ethic and an inclusive vision, positions India uniquely in the global arena. India's ability to demonstrate these values on the global stage can help bridge divides and reduce polarization. By showing that we are all members of the same global family, India can inspire others to adopt a more inclusive and collaborative approach. This is not just beneficial for India, but for the entire world. In conclusion, India's journey towards global leadership is not just about economic growth or strategic alliances. It is about embodying and promoting values that can unite us all. It is about leading with a vision of inclusiveness and shared success. Let us take inspiration from India's example and work together to create a future where every nation, every community, and every individual can thrive.
Thank you. Thank you also for staying well within your time. And you have touched upon the key issues. I'll come back to you to ask you some difficult questions on what are the challenges. I'll come to that. But let me turn to Raja, and you may also give your perspective on how do you see this issue. Yeah.
Thank you, Ashok, and thank you, CII, for inviting me. So I'm going to expand on some of the things Ashok has already said in terms of the international perceptions of India's foreign policy and India's strategy. So the first thing I want to say is really there's actually great recognition of India pulling off the G20 summit, as you said. It didn't look like they were room for a successful summit, given where the Ukraine war was. But I think in the end, India did produce a joint statement, and we did manage the outcome. But I think, but there is a challenge. The challenge is going to get worse. If you can think of the G20 summit as a trapeze act, as a high wire act, on a high wire, you're only as good as your last. So I think that wire is getting higher. the challenge of managing the global complexities are going to get worse. What we're seeing is today's President Putin is in Beijing. The China-Russia relationship is getting deeper, and the confrontation with the West is growing stronger. Also, for India, then, which has really dramatically expanded its relationship with the West in the last 2 decades, but managed to hold on to the relationship with Russia and is locked in long conflict with China. So, how does it manage this? So, this High Wire Act, the world is going to see whether India. We heard the foreign minister in the morning, Jaishankar, talk about the importance of Russia for India. But I think managing the contradictions between China and Russia on the one hand, between them and the West, is going to get a lot worse. So the world is going to see how India is going to manage that. The second point I want to make is the thin line between self-confidence and assertiveness. The sense of a rising India, I mean, there's been generally a sense, look, India has arrived, we are here, our voice matters. So there's a lot of self-congratulation. But at the same time, the danger that how the others see us, that too much of, breast beating doesn't look good for others. I mean, it might look good itself. So therefore, the question of how does India does not generate negative vibes by the sense of assertion. So that line, because I think for decades, I've always the one who said India was too diffident, too self-effacing, too quickly. But today, I think when it gets more confident of itself, it should also be more reasonable, more accommodative rather than being aggressive. And I think managing that balance between confident, self-assured on the one hand, and prickly and aggressive on the other, I think is a challenge. And there, I think the social media makes it worse. While the government statements are very careful on the international situation, the YouTube world, I mean, takes off on anything. And everyone is ready to attack everyone in the world because it's cheap. I mean, you don't have any consequences. You're not responsible for policy making. Therefore, it's a free run. But I think that creates an ecosystem of danger, which I think we all should be aware of. The third issue I wanted to flag was really the tension between, we all love the West. We want the Western endorsement. Every time somebody gets an award in the US of tech, we're rising, we're strong, but at the same time, we must expect much greater external scrutiny for economic policies, our domestic politics, the way we organize ourselves. And I think that's part of the package. You can't expect to be the third largest economy and expect nobody will say anything to you, or they're simply not going to say anything to you. Because there are people who are putting money in here. There are people, a whole industry of investment bankers. All they do in their life is to see what is the risk, how much money to put in. So I think the world is going to watch us very closely. So that doesn't mean we have to be bend and bow to the world, but I think we should be conscious. We should be open for more engagement, more positive, more productive engagement, and to remove some of the doubts, because a lot of the opinions about India shaped by one or two liberal papers. So therefore, for us, I think that calls for greater engagement with elites in the world rather than less. So these are the three things I would say. A high wire act on the geopolitics, which is in a dangerous moment. A second, I think, the between assertion and self-confidence. And third, being thin-skinned and being more positive about engaging the world.
Thank you very much once again for staying within that 5-minute limit. And also, the line that I remember from your brief intervention is that the world will watch us closely. I think that's something which we need to be really conscious of. With these words, Richard, your thoughts for 5 minutes?
Yeah. Well, first, again, thanks also to CII. The reason I flew out on last minute notice to be here, I haven't seen an audience like this in DC in quite some time. Post-COVID, in-person events are still kind of a rarity to attract these kind of crowds. So it's great to see and stretch my legs and pretend like it was the pre-COVID days. My remarks, I think, are a perfect flow from what Raja had just said. Because to try to level set, um, there is kind of a thin skin that we perceive from Delhi. You do have some articles coming out in major U.S. media when they talk about, the alleged attacks against Khalistani terrorists and things like that. or a report comes out on religious freedom in India, gets dinged, there's a perception that like America cares, and America doesn't writ large. There is not a lot of attention across most of America on these elections. The newspapers, when you think about what people are really getting fed right now, it is about Russia, Ukraine, it is about the Middle East. But most importantly, it's about our own election, which is coming not too far down the pike. And as we have our former president in court right now, that is really what like most Americans. But that's to say, that's obviously the average American. But we're here to talk more about the power users, right? People in government, people in private sector, people that have day-to-day engagement. Among that group, I would say there's a lot of complacency. I don't think anybody assumes that there's going to be a change in Delhi. And overall, I kind of agree with that. But I was also doing this back in 2004 when we felt that there wasn't going to be a change. And it was pretty tough to imagine what might possibly take place. It is a democracy and crazy things happen. So I don't think if there's any kind of change or difference that anybody is really thinking or preparing for what that might look like. We have not done in the United States a good job of engaging opposition parties, of engaging some of these regional parties. And if there is a change or even a coalition, the idea about engaging a lot of the other groups that are going to be important in shaping U.S.-India relations, I think we kind of fallen by the wayside because we just can't imagine anything other than the current dispensation being around for a long time. Again, I agree. I think that's what likely to happen, but you can't put all your eggs in an individual basket that way. There also, I would say, in the last few months, we've seen kind of the narrative turn on its head a little bit about what we thought elections meant for the things that the United States cares about. The second term of the Modi government has been relatively light on major economic reforms, FDI reforms, major domestic reforms. And it's not because of COVID, which I sometimes hear when I bring this up. Most reforms that have taken place in the second term took place when the economic doldrums really hit hard because of COVID. So COVID was actually a trigger reforms in India rather than a reason for pause. You've seen FDI numbers drop. And a lot of Americans, I think we thought that India taking major decisions on economic reforms or on major security issues, things were sensitive. Usually that's the kind of stuff that governments do just after elections rather than just before. But what have you seen so far in 2024? Two big things happened just weeks before the national election was announced. India announced a more liberal FDI policy in space, a very sensitive sector. Could have delayed it till after the election. But the fact they did it before kind of indicates the government's confidence, but also the fact that across the Indian public, there's less concern about foreign investment, even in sensitive sectors. And second, we actually had a military exercise. It didn't get a lot of press, but for those of us that follow U.S. India defense ties, we had a major significant military exercise in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, an area that had largely been kind of off limits for U.S. Security engagement. So the kind of things that we thought would typically happen, maybe just post an election when you had a government with a fresh mandate, they're actually doing beforehand. So I think there's a lot of hope and excitement and interest that maybe the rest of 2024, now that we see a bit of spark on new ideas again, that we'll actually see a pretty good jump into big reforms. There are still 30 sectors that have FDI limitations, trade policy, things like that, because the world needs India to kind of step up as it's been doing as a critical market, as a security partner, and hoping that the rest of the year portends good things. So thanks for having me again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Uh, I will come back to you on what your idea of economic reforms, because I will come back to you on your idea of economic reforms that you have seen and probably can bolster India's image to the world's eyes. We'll come back to that. Thank you. Let me turn to Munir, and you are the last speaker in this first round. Please let us have your views on how India is viewed by the world and what needs to be done.
Uh, Thank you. Being the only one from India's neighborhood, I'll try to speak in a language आप भी समझता है मैं भी समझता है मेरा हिंदी अच्छा नहीं है काम चलता है एंड मेरा मेरा ट्यूटर है आपको कैब ड्राइवर जब तक मैं कैब में उठता है उनको साथ हर हमेशा बात करे रहता है और जब एयरपोर्ट पे रिटर्न जर्नी है मैं पूछता है थोड़ा सा बताइए तो मेरा हिंदी कैसे है सो मेरा ग्रेड अच्छा है सो बोलता है बढ़िया है काम चलता है सो ये है मेरा लेवल सो विथ हिज परमिशन आई मेक इट वेरी इनफॉर्मल India, the space I've been asked to speak, expectations in the neighborhood. Closer? It's better now? Expectations in the neighborhood. Our parental generation grew up in Indian subcontinent when India, Bangladesh, Pakistan all were one country. And as you can imagine, no matter how politics or geopolitics have played out, our deep-rooted connection, empathy, feeling remains same. Politics has not taken away the people-to-people love, affection that cut across borders. And whenever I've been in Delhi, ye dil se baat kar rahe hu, I've never felt I'm outside home. And that credit goes to people like you. And I'll give you one more example. I'm just borrowing 1 2 extra minutes from stolen from my previous speakers. 2 years back, मैंने जब immigration में passport check-in कर रहा था, this gentleman who checks in passports on a sudden tells me, मैंने तो आपका नाम देखा था. I got very worried. क्या list, क्या नाम? I said, जी. Then I was so surprised. He reads Hindu and Times of India, and he remembers my name. And then he tells me which one I should write more for, which one I should not. That I'm not going to tell because my friends in the media are here. I was amazed. The reason I'm starting this example, what a great country you have, and how inspiring you have been to the region. When we grew up in our childhood days, our perception of India has been a country of great history, civilization, diversity, and from outside, it is your diversity, it's your plurality that amazed us. So, as a friend well wisher, I will always say, don't let that slip away. That's what makes you Indian. That's what makes you rise to the stage. That is fundamental. Trade, economy, investment, I can keep on talking forever. But I would like to start with some basics. Since CII, since business, I will not be doing justice to my host if I don't touch some of the basic things. If India actually graduates to a fully developed economy 2047, imagine you have a middle class of 1 billion plus. Imagine what kind of market it opens for Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal. Imagine the huge success of India, how it can spill over. And in the neighborhood, even going by numbers, a 1% increase in India's GDP leads to 0.5 to 1% rise in GDP of Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka. We have a lot of stake in India's success. We have our own interest. So I would encourage that expectation from neighborhood. As the Indian business community takes helm of affairs, we see more multinational India spawning from this part of the world. I would hope your first destination would be your neighborhood. Look what's happening in North America. Of all the trade investment America does, one third goes to Canada and Mexico. Look what's happening in Europe. Of all the trade investment Germany makes, more than half goes to European countries. We should not be any different. Sad reality is trade within South Asia is not even 5% of the trade we conduct with the rest of the world. Even more sad, imagine 1.8 billion people, one fourth of global population, one of the fastest growing region in the world before the pandemic, paradoxically, which also houses one third of global poor. So there are ample opportunities and challenges. Do I still have 1 more minute? Yeah. So we have to rise to the occasion. So first would be investment, and India is a great, ideally poised nation for connectivity. India can be the hub for regional energy grid. Things are happening even as we speak. India is building a hydropower plant in Nepal. There is a lot of transmission lines bringing power from India to Bangladesh. Much more needs to happen. We need to rise on connectivity, road, rail, waterway. There is no reason why such a small region with such dense population can't connect better. Why do goods have to go en route and consumers pay a higher price because of poor connectivity? Third but not the least, more people to people interaction. We still need visas. and we make a lot of hue and cry out of this. So these would be some of the key issues I would like to harp on where we should begin. But of course, in the next couple of rounds with the moderators, as he had very cautioned us ahead of time, he'll have more probing questions. I'm looking forward to that and also engaging with the audience. Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Uh, Thank you, Munir Bhai. Um, I will change the sequence of the second round. I will start with you, uh, and you made a very very important intervention, and there are actually not one but two. One is where politics not taking away from the importance of people to people contacts. That's number one. And number two, the importance of diversity and plurality. Now, can you elaborate a little more on how these two, image points, I would say, need to be improved or bettered in order to the world to see India in a better light? Your
How many
thoughts?
minutes do I have now?
3 minutes, 3 to
Acha,
4 minutes.
ठीक है. I'll be very frank. What happens आपका border में या आपका, it's your business. I come here as a friend and a well-wisher. When I say pluralism, diversity, I meant a country where everybody has an opportunity to view, express his or her views. Some of the thing I hear recent times, even when we opened our think tank in Delhi, 90% of my friends in the media and civil society said, do not open office in Delhi. This is not the right environment. We are struggling to survive. How do you dare to come in? I came in any case. I got in. But that's not the advice I expected. That's not the image of India I would want to see. I would want to see all my Indian friends telling me, Brookings is here, Carnegie is here, why aren't you here? That is something you have to sort out. Now, taking advantage of the free and frank discussions, a few things happen which in the neighborhood at times concerns us, if it not upsets us. I'll give you a simple example. You saw a lot of things about Citizenship Amendment Act, CA, which came out. From our side of the border, our Prime Minister, who's known to be a very good friend of India, even she herself said it was unnecessary. आप neutrally आपको पूछिए, आज बांग्लादेश का parliament, if there was a bill, all persecuted minorities in Bangladesh's neighborhood are welcome to take refuge, except Hindus. How would it sound to you? So, आपका दिल में दुख लगता, मेरा दिल में भी दुख लगता. Why are you pointing me out and making me feel as if being Muslim is something wrong? I'm being very frank. When I come to Delhi, I forget everything because you're so warm, you're so hospitable. So, going to justice to the moderator's questions, as you rise to the, I'll be very frank. Leader hona chahiye, you must have a big heart. You cannot be a leader without a big heart. बड़ा भाई होना चाहिए, दिल बड़ा होना चाहिए. Period. इतना एनालिसिस, थिंक टैंक, डिस्कशन कोई जरूरत नहीं है. सच बात. बड़ा होना चाहिए. स्टार्ट विद योर हार्ट. प्यार से बात करेंगे, मैं रहूंगी. नहीं करेंगे तो मैं चली जाएगी. And being very frank, Maldives चल गया, नेपाल चल गया, बांग्लादेश still with you. Don't lose us. हम लोग एक तरफ खून दिया, बांग्लादेश स्वाधीन हुआ. हम लोग का टान बहुत स्ट्रांग है. इसके लिए मैं भी बोल रहा हूं, rise above small geopolitics, small petty ethnic issues. If you want to rise to the global stage, bask in your own glory, it starts with your neighborhood. If you're not a leader in your neighborhood, you cannot be a global leader. Trust me. It starts with your neighbor. There will be difficult neighbors. You are the bigger one. You are 1.4 billion. All of us combined is not even half of you. So you ask me, is it a fair expectation? If the answer is yes, the ball is in your court. I remain optimistic. India has much to offer. And as my previous speakers alluded, you have led a great G20 leadership. You're being a great front for the developing country, global south. We take a lot of pride and joy, and we want to take more pride and joy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure, those of us who may have been going to sleep after this beautiful intervention from Munir, they've all woken up. Let me come to Richard. And I know you don't know Hindi, so therefore you may not get
Hindi
as
bahut acha.
थोड़ा थोड़ा Hindi hai.
That's almost
Uh,
all the Hindi I know, by the way.
yeah. So my question to you is twofold. One is that you talked about India's reforms. Can you tell us a little bit about the way USA is seeing India? Uh, has the definition of reforms changed? That's number one. And number two, what are the challenges that you see if the US perception and US relations with India on economic and even on geostrategic fronts can get better?
Yeah. Yeah, I look at reforms and kind of break it up into four major buckets, and I'll contrast a little bit Modi's first term, the second term, and some things that happened before, but I'll keep it brief. Foreign direct investment, trade policy, domestic reform, and the fourth bucket, which is competitive cooperative federalism. On FDI, the first term you saw more than 40 FDI liberalizations. The second term you've seen five or six. Now, they were more sensitive sectors, defense, telecom, insurance, but a big down. And it's not because India's liberalized everything. There's still 40 sectors that either have FDI limitations or sometimes beyond the FDI cap, there's other regulations that limit what foreign companies can do. But even the embrace of foreign companies, I think in the Modi government's first term, you saw him traveling the world and, publicly hugging CEOs of foreign companies, trying to lure them into India, and a little bit less kind of that sort of time and attention in the second term. So there's some work to be done on FDI, but the sectors India needs to really get right on manufacturing, those are pretty open. So that's a little bit less relevant. Trade is probably the one area you've seen a big change in the positive camp. I mean, every time you got a meeting of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, I get calls from U.S. trade journalists saying, "How are we going to get India more excited on trade?" And my response is, India is actually more pro-trade than America is now. And that is a bitter pill for American journalists to choke on. But you see India actually signing trade deals. They're not as robust as like a NAFTA deal. They don't cover investment and such, but they're a lot more meaningful than I think most of us expect our IPEF deal is going to be. So on trade, you saw a lot of limitations in the first term, but the second term, a big change to actually look at a more proactive trade policy. That's something we would love to see doubled down on, removing trade restrictions in India, input goods, intermediate goods, things like that. Domestic reforms, a lot again in the first term, obviously GST, bankruptcy, but even some sectoral reforms that don't get as much attention, like the oil and gas exploration reforms. And again, a little bit less the second term. You saw, reduction in corporate tax rate, some other modest things. But the fourth bucket, though, to me, is by far the most important. At the end of the day, states run this country. It's been brought up a couple of times sporadically, but you talk about the factor. How is India going to achieve dominance over China to attract manufacturing? The answer is not in this town. The answer is in places like Patna and Lucknow and Bhubaneswar, the places that need to initiate major reforms. How many states have liberalized their labor regulations? How many states have made it easier to acquire land? How many states have, one of the biggest reforms that's happened in the last 5 years was in Odisha. I mean, despite a failed attempt on privatizing electricity 30 years ago, they did it again and it's been going swimmingly. Odisha doesn't come up a lot in terms of states that are going to zoom ahead. It's the one state where anywhere you're going to be in the state before long, you're going to get access to 24/7 reliable electric power. You can source green power if you want to. So states, a lot of innovative stuff that's happening there. But again, the union government can do more on ranking states' business environment. They did the BRAP a few times. They let that fall off. Get back on that, make it more credible, do investor surveys to find out how it's going. So that's the bucket. I think if India is going to become that next best source for companies to place large manufacturing, you got to get a few more states that are actually pulling at the oars. And if that happens, and Delhi can certainly coax and make that happen, then I think that the tidal wave of investment we all want to see happen is a lot more likely.
Thank you very much for being synced. Let me come to Raja. Uh, you touched upon uh, the important challenge of managing negative vibes and prevent them actually. Um, and also, you underlined the importance that as a growing power, India must also recognize that it must will be under watch. Both these points are very important that will determine the way the world sees us. Now, can you tell us maybe two or three important steps that the Indian government can actually consider to achieve both these very important imperative goals? And I would say that we started late. We started at 6:30 instead of 6:15. So I assume we'll be going on till 7:30. But unfortunately, our speaker, Mr. Raja Mohan, will have to leave at 7:15. So what I would do is this: after he completes his intervention, with your permission, I would invite some questions specifically aimed at Raja Mohan, so that we make you free at 7:15 sharp. Go ahead.
No, I think on the question of the Indian assertion, I mean, the government, on the one hand, we don't want them to control the media because no one can control the social media. But somewhere, I think the civil society to be able to self-regulate. I mean, I think because just abusing outsiders all the time and claiming you arrived doesn't sit well. I think if you've actually arrived, you should be far more self-confident, far more willingness to tolerate dissent and criticism rather than attacking anyone who criticizes you. And I think that's part of the. And I think we've seen this before, certainly in China, where hyper nationalism actually creates problems for the government. Its capacity, its room for maneuver gets tightened if the domestic opinion whips itself into a frenzy on every minor issue. I mean, most of it happens in Delhi. That if you go to the rest of the country, I mean, people are not so excited by what excites Delhi media. But I think there is a problem because Delhi is what much of the world watches. So I think the more responsibility on the part of a media, I think, at least the mainstream and others who need to temper the hyper reactions to everything that happens in the world. Second, I think there is today a widespread liberal criticism of India. I think India has lost a lot of liberal friends across the West. Now, as a realist, I would argue that look, when we were a democracy, it didn't really make much difference to the US. They were quite happy with China and Pakistan. So it's not that we have to please others, but I think as a genuine democracy, we need more open engagement with our critics, not with those who kind of clapping for us, but those who criticize us. We should be able to convince them, engage them, rather than merely saying anybody who criticizes India has got some agenda or motivation. So I think that is a major challenge, I think, for us as a collective, that we need to do more engagement with the world rather than simply putting people into boxes. So and so is against us, so and so is against us. If you start doing that, there won't be many people left who are pro US, pro U. So therefore, I think it's important to do that. And finally, I would say it's also that internally the need for a more you know permissive environment for people to write and criticize. I mean, I think that's an issue today in the elections. That's an issue for think tanks in particular. Here, I would say I would blame all of you sitting here that think tanks I've run many think tanks, but if we don't get out of the government support, government is a MyBop in India. Everything is funded by them. So unless the corporate sector steps forward and supports think tanks, supports universities, create capabilities in the country, those are not dependent on the government funding or government goodwill or depend on who is in power. It should not be that today one government likes me, the next one doesn't. So we should be actually be able to sustain our intellectual activity on the basis of public support, and in which I think the corporate sector is really the main one. So really make an appeal to all of you, find ways to support, uh, you know, activity, whether universities, think tanks, research. So I would say really this where I think even taking into question of overall R&D budgets in India, there I think there's a lot more that the corporate sector can do. And I hope some point they step in there.
Thank you. I think you touched upon three very, very important issues, and even sort of provoke the audience here. Self-regulation for media, social media, um, the government to understand the importance of open engagement, as well as for industry to help create a more permissive environment by promoting think tanks, even media, which are more open. I think at this point, I will just make a deviation from the routine. If there are any questions from the floor, maybe we'll take two questions, mainly aimed at Raja Mohan, so that he can answer them, and then he will like to leave. If there are any questions, mics can be given to them, please. People are tired, I think, at the end of the day. Okay. I think then but I will not let you go. Yeah. Uh, you talked about um, uh, India's engagement with the US, that when India was pursuing democracy, and yet the US relations, so US was seeing India differently. But now India is following a different, not necessarily undemocratic, but a different kind of a path. The US is listening to us probably more, and there's more engagement. Is that a correct assessment? And how do you think this needs to be handled?
No, I'll go back to what Rick was saying earlier, that look, just because there's one report in one newspaper, don't go crazy, that whole of America is against. That it's those who talk about democracy, promoting democracy in the US and West, there are a large number of them. But those who do business with you guys, yeah, there are much more. They're the guys who are going to put real money. New York Times is not going to invest in India. So I think even if you ask any Republican, a decent one, he dismisses New York Times. Look, this is a partisan paper, devoted to the Democrats, they're hostile to the average American. So that is their own view. So don't get this, again, being thin-skinned and reacting to every report, every comment in the West. Just as we said earlier, we love the endorsement. We love, oh, New York Times bestseller, we are number one. Great. Indian cook show has done very well in Australia. I mean, but at the same time, any slight criticism go ballistic. So I think the US follows its interests. US is not a Sant Samaj running global charity. It's not Sisters of Charity, right? So they have interests, they have geopolitical stakes, they have economic interests, they have commercial interests. Those align with China and Pakistan through the Cold War. Today, they're aligned with India. So that is the fundamental driver that is moving India-US relations, not what the New York Times says about India, not what some of the some group in the US says, because they've always be there. Because after all, in that country, you can't lock up people for saying things. So therefore, there are a multitude of views in the US. But I think the main direction of US strategy, US policy today has never been as aligned with India's interests in the region as they are today. So I think we should not forget that in reacting to every single report. Some people will say some things, but the question is, are we pursuing our interests? Are we pursuing them wisely? And are we working with the Americans or the West or the Russians, whoever it is, to build on those convergences rather than reacting to every single negative report that might appear?
Thank you, Raja. Unfortunately, Raja has to. One question. Okay, please go ahead. The mic, please. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Rajmohan, thank you very much. In fact, we keep reading your articles, very critical and very fair. दूध का दूध, पानी का पानी, आप लिखते रहते. But going forward on the same line, China plus and minus China supply chain strategies are moving around. And we know very well, without China, there are a lot of things cannot happen also. But how do you strike balance actually in that?
Actually, Rick will answer this much better, but I'll just say, look, 40 years of interdependence with China is not going to be undone in a single day. Whether it's US, which has almost billion, no, at least $500 billion of trade. Europe is struggling. Everyone has massive trade. Today, 30% of the world's manufacturing is in China. And they're going to even increase it, the overcapacity problem. So that is a reality. Now, yeah, So India today, you have 130 billion, $120 billion trade, $100 billion trade deficit. So you're stuck. All your intermediaries come from China. But the thing is, in some areas, like on 5G, 6G, you're beginning to dissociate in some areas. That's okay, the top end. But the middle, where your inputs largely come from China, that's going to be a challenge for a long time. And that's where can we move faster to create conditions for more manufacturing in India? How we do it? These two gentlemen know more about economics and manufacturing than we'll ever get to know.
Thank you very much, Raja. And please give him a big hand. He has to leave now. Uh, Thank you very much. Please carry on.
Before Dr. Raja Mohan leaves, may I request Mr.
Raja,
Bhattacharya to please present sir with the token of appreciation. Thank you.
Let me now turn to
To
Edith.
the tough questions.
And two questions. You talked about the need for reducing polarization, and you also talked about, you didn't talk about it, but I'm asking you this actually, that how do you reduce polarization at the same time realize the true potential of Indo-European partnerships uh, without it falling a prey or a victim to a perception problem? What are those areas that India needs to look at so that that perception, the way Europe sees India, gets more productive and positive?
You were announcing that it was going to be tough. It is. But I'm trying to answer the question. First of all, there is not only the perception of how India sees the world, but that's what we're here for, how the world sees India. And there is different perception from both ends, and that's also polarization. One is seeing the amazing position that India is in. We know from numbers and everything that in the next 20 years, you're in an amazing place. You will strive, and everybody will look at India, and you will show them how it's going to be. So you can be very proud of that, and I'm proud with you and happy for you as well. That's why I think that the world should be looking differently at India, not so much India at the world. When India passed in numbers the biggest number of people in a country, when you passed the numbers of China, there was a journalist that asked me, a Dutch journalist of the Dutch Financial Times, and asked me, what does India have to do now to deal with Europe? It's more or less a similar question to what you were asking me. And my answer was to him, I think you don't understand. It's not what India has to do to Europe. It is what Europe has to do to India to make sure that we got a common understanding. Because quite honestly, we need you more than you need us. So that's for sure. You are in a much better place than Europe, much better. I can only talk about Europe. I don't talk about the rest of the world, but I have been coming to India ever since 2016, and I have seen a striving nation, a proud nation that is really going somewhere and taking the young with them. There are a lot of youngs. But if you compare it to Europe, and that's what you said, there, the young generation says, well, I'm entitled to X, I'm entitled to Y, give it to me. I'm not willing to work for it. That's a huge difference in mentality. One of the things is, and that is definitely important, the Netherlands, I'm proud of that as well, is the worldwide fourth biggest investor into India. We are the fourth biggest foreign investor into India, being a tiny country of 17 million, which is far less than Delhi. And we want to stay like that. So there is not only a friendship, a warm feeling between the nations, but there are strong economic ties and diplomatic relationships. So size doesn't always matter. You can be friends even if the tiny ones are the fourth biggest investor in the world to the number one country on top of the game right now. So the mutual understanding is important. And you said, what can India do? Well, let me try to answer that because I'm mainly from what can Europe do to enhance it. I think in our I'm moving to a bit a delicate topic in our discussions about the free trade agreement with Europe. I'm very happy. I'm originally Swiss. You managed with EFTA. I'm proud of that as well. I was there in Davos when it happened. So you are playing a bit tough there with Europe to get into the free trade agreement. And I get it from where you are, because as I said, we need you more than you need us. But if you could get, a little bit less tough on these negotiations, I would be even happier because I'm really looking to I hope that this free trade agreement will come with Europe as well. So a bit less tough.
Okay, I hope the government will listen to you. Uh, let me before I come to the audience here, let me do a quick rapid fire session. And the rapid fire session is each of our. It's all right. uh, uh, what is what? There's one thing that each of you think needs to be done to make a material difference on the positive side on the way the world sees India. To the way the world sees India. What is it that you think that should be done? One point. Only.
It's tough. Uh, I would put it this way, if you're just to make one point. Um, I think that goes a little bit to what my colleague, Mr. Raja Mohan, had said. You have every legitimate right to feel confident, to feel buoyant, because not only of the size of the population of the great civilization you bring in. My advice as a friend, as a well-wisher would be use it wisely. And if you are to capture the center stage, be ready. It will involve a lot of painful adjustment, sacrifice. You have to make a choice. You can't be in the center of the thing and very legitimately aspire your rightful position without making tough compromises, starting with your neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
So one thing I'd like to see a lot more of, India surpassed China as the number one source for students coming and studying in the United States. But how many American kids, especially those without
Mhm.
any Indian background or that actually travel to India to study at Indian colleges and universities? And now that businesses, I mean, you think about how many American companies have their largest or second largest workforce in the world here in India doing engineering and IT and technology and so many things. Companies around this room, how many internships do you go and proactively pursue at US business schools? And not just the Harvards, right? But state schools and Michigan and places like that. So I think it's a long-term play, but you got to start somewhere. And I think you need more Americans, some exposure to India, so that you kind of get that balance a little bit more effectively. More Americans then in corporate roles and things like that are going to have that familiarity, which I think is going to help quite a bit in making sure that two hands are clapping for this relationship in the future.
I think it's a wonderful suggestion that you made. I hope the Indian government as well as the Indian industry takes it up seriously. Wonderful point. Edith.
Well, whenever I come here, what is so warm, one of the signs of it is the warm embrace that I get from every single one of you that I come here, and then it really feels like home. So one thing that people would probably really feel if that embrace is not only when coming here, but also when you're coming to us. And I get it from you everywhere in the world, but in Europe, probably people are afraid that India is only looking for people coming here, make in India, and not going there. So if you show that the way we work together is not only coming here, but also going there, I think that would make a world of a difference.
Oh, wonderful. We have come to the end of this session, almost just 2 minutes left. But I think if there are one or two questions which we can take, if there are any questions, yeah, there is one question. Please go ahead, identify yourself and give the question.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Pradeep Mehta from Cuts. Question is to Munir. Munir, you spoke about CAA. Can I ask you a question? Uh, if you look at the percentage of population of Hindus in Bangladesh or Pakistan, from 1947 to now, they've come down very drastically. That shows something. And one of the reasons why Government of India has enacted the CAA to provide protection to such minorities, particularly from uh, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. Now, if you remember, the background to this is the Liaquat Ali Khan Pact, which was never implemented properly. So, what would be your response to this question? Thank you.
It's always good to hear from you, Pradipta, but I could see you, but I can see you there. Well, I cannot speak for Pakistan. I can speak for Bangladesh. I can tell you this much: come anytime, we take a lot of pleasure, privilege, pride in being genuinely a very tolerant, multi-ethnic country. And I can give you example. I grew up in childhood days. Two of my neighbors were Hindus. There's not a single Durga Puja, as you know, Bengali Hindus do Durga Puja more than any, that we haven't eaten their prasad. There hasn't been a single Eid, even the last Eid, they haven't come to us. So I can tell you this much, that in our country, particularly the current government, there has been zero tolerance for any such thing, any sectarian ugly head up and down. The reason I brought out this thing in my remarks, this is one of those platforms we come and be very honest with each other. I won't do justice to your friendship if I have something inside my heart and something else in my mouth. So I just quoted that particular portion of the Constitution just to get you feel how you would have felt. No other thing. And regarding your allusion to number, again, I cannot speak for Pakistan, but if you ask me, a significant portion of our Hindu population, for whatever reasons, have also significantly invested in real estate, other particularly in Kolkata side. And I think it's a good sign if they are making some savings and they have that. And during partition, a lot of families got split up. So part of the families are also that side. So if some Hindus are doing financially well and they think they have enough money to also buy house in Salt Lake, I think it's good for Bangladesh, good for India. So I would tend to look at it that way, as opposed to the demographic angle. They are fleeing. No Hindu is fleeing Bangladesh, I can tell you this much. If they have made a conscious choice, there are some generations are out there, they want to, it's their perfect choice, we are not stopping them. So I'm glad you raised it, because that in a way probably may have removed some of the apprehension some people may have the audience.
So one cannot deny the data which exists. On the contrary, which a point which I wanted to make was that the Muslim population in India as a percentage has expanded. We are much more tolerant and we are much more accepting. Thank you.
There is always story behind data. Who's more tolerant, less tolerant? Let's save it for some other day. Thank you.
I think we can sort of.
Sir, can I ask a
If
question?
there aren't any questions, then we will like to. Is there any question? You
Sir,
have to be very brief and you have to ask a question, not give your opinion. Please.
only how you, I think you prejudged me, it appears. I'm only asking a question to our friend from Europe, that
our friend from Europe, that India, of course, want more and more relationship with Europe. There's no doubt about it. But we need a support from you in the sense that your double taxation avoidance agreements with America and European countries are different, and they are different with India. The kind of benefit you give when the beneficial owners are Europeans or Americans, you give them more benefit in double taxation avoidance agreement. You don't get that to Indian. Kindly look at that. I think more and more investment will come to you.
Your thoughts?
Well, thank you for raising these questions. This is exactly down the alley where I was going already. Let's go for that free trade agreement, and we're done.
Okay, lovely. I think we have to. I have got signals from from sources that matter that I have to close the session now. I think it's very difficult to sum up a very rich session discussion like this. But what stands out, I will try to sum up in four quick short points. Uh, for India to recognize that the world's vision of India needs to get better, I think the 4 points come through. One is there is need for a two-way engagement, at times people to people engagement. There's also need for maintaining openness. There is need for India to expect scrutiny as we grow larger and grow big. And finally, there's need for continuing reforms, as Richard rightly pointed out. I would like to close the session here. Thank you very much to all my panelists here for being very cooperative, very helpful in staying within our given time of 1 hour. Thank you once again and making it a very good session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. May I request Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya to please present a token of appreciation to all our esteemed panelists. And can I request Miss Edith Nordman to please present the token of appreciation to Mr. Bhattacharya? Thank you so much. Thank you. One photograph, please. Thank you so much. With that, we come to a close to this session, but we will be beginning the next session immediately after. So I